Okay, let's get cracking. So welcome everyone to this PLSA Policy Insights webinar on what can smaller schemes expect in 2023. I'm James Walsh, I'm the Head of Membership Engagement, and it's a pleasure to welcome you this morning. I'm going to be joined by a very good lineup of experts, both in-house and from our membership, who are going to help us to sort of gaze into the crystal ball of 2023. So the way we're going to do this, our plan for today, is first, I'm going to be asking Geordie Skilbeck, who's our own PLSA Senior Policy Advisor, to give his insights into what's going on at Westminster in government that's sort of shaping the regulatory agenda. And I know Geordie's very keen to know what issues our delegates are most interested in. I think that's right, Geordie. So do type that into the chat right now, and we'll try and make sure we pick up those issues. After Geordie, we'll be hearing from Paul Tremeling. Paul is Senior Reward Manager for International Retirement at Visa Europe. He's also on our PLSA DC Policy Committee. So he's going to be talking about the issues that are on his watch list for next year. After Paul, I'm going to go to Karen Hurst, who's Senior Policy Advisor here on Investment and Stewardship, so a key member of the PLSA policy team. She's going to talk about the DB agenda and what she thinks are on the issues there next year. And then finally, we'll hear from my colleague Rory Grant, who's our policy lead on DC. Rory's going to cover DC issues, of course. So lots to get through. We're keen to make this interactive. Do put your questions in the Q&A box at any time. Don't just wait for the end. We'll pick those up as we go through, and we'll finish at 11:45, and we'll circulate. If someone asks, we will circulate the recording and the very brief slides as well. And of course, we've not ignored the fact that at 11:30, the Chancellor is standing up to make his autumn statement. My colleagues elsewhere in our policy team will be keeping a very close eye on that, and they'll be circulating briefing to all our members, of course, certainly tomorrow, maybe later today, on whatever issues affect pensions. So let's get right into it. Geordie, good morning to you. I think you wanted to start with a question and a challenge to the audience, so over to you.
Yeah, thank you, James, and thank you for the introduction. Good morning, all. Yeah, so as James introduced me, I'm the Senior Policy Advisor at the PLSA, and today I'll be giving an update kind of on government affairs and maybe what to expect from the budget or the autumn statement later today. The question I wanted to put to you all this morning was essentially, please let me know if you've got any kind of burning interest in anything that's come up recently over the last few months in relation to what's been going on at Westminster, or even dating back over the last 8 years since the Brexit vote happened. There's been a lot of turmoil since. We've had quite a number of prime ministers, we've had quite a few Secretary of States in the Department for Work and Pensions, and now we're on our third pensions minister in the last 3-4 months. So yeah, please do, while I'm speaking, drop any questions that you've got into the chat feature. Thank you.
Thanks, Geordie. So while we wait for questions to come in from the audience, I'd like to get your thoughts, Geordie, on the sort of political situation. So we've got a new pensions minister in place just a couple of weeks or so now, Laura Trott. What do we know, if anything, about her sort of likely agenda?
So, in all honesty, not too much at the moment. So she was elected in 2019, so she's a relatively recent MP, and this is her first ministerial position. What we would like to find out from her is a bit more her position and kind of relation to private pension matters, because that will be the brief that she's covering. However, since her appointment, we believe that she's been very much tied up on what's going to be announced today in relation to state pension and the triple lot feature related to that. Over the last few months, we've had Alex Burghardt also stepping in as the pensions minister, and it was very good that we continued the engagement that we had prior with Guy Opperman, following through with him. So some of you may have attended the PLSA annual conference, and you would have seen him speak on stage, and he kind of gave an update on what at the time was his kind of position on what he wanted and expected from the pension industry. Obviously, he's no longer in post anymore. He's moved over to the Cabinet Office, and we have Laura Trott, and we're still waiting to find out what her priorities are in relation to the pension industry right now.
Okay, so it's sort of wait and see of the new minister, and I know our colleagues will be meeting her, briefing her, and her official course, trying to make sure we keep that sort of good working relationship with the DWP going. And of course, we had Alex Burkhardt speaker has come and spoken to us as well, but was only in post a matter of weeks.
Yes.
But Guy Opperman, I mean, Guy was in post as a pension minister for a pretty long period of time, some years, one of the longer serving ones in recent memory. Do you have any thoughts on how different the new agenda under the new minister might be from him? Because I think there were some issues he was quite sort of personally committed to. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Guy is still at the Department for Work and Pensions. However, he's not directly dealing with private pensions anymore. He's been received a promotion, so he's a Minister of State now for employment. So that also covers the labour market and whatnot. So while we can hope the new pension minister will be able to rely on his expertise and kind of his experience in terms of being, as James said, the longest serving pension minister, we can't wholly expect that the priorities he had before in relation to dashboards and whatnot will be carried through over to this new minister. We can hope, but we can't expect it.
Okay, so let's see. So look, the Chancellor is going to be standing up in a few minutes announcing what are likely to be some pretty tough sort of fiscal measures. Clearly, it looks like we're into a bit of a new age of maybe sort of austerity. What do you think that might mean for pensions policy?
Yeah, so in total, the package is going to be roughly equated to £35 billion in spending cuts and £25 billion in tax rises. And that's to partially plug the black hole that existed after came about during the aftermath of the Quasi-Kwarteng's mini autumn budget or mini budget. We can expect a range of things. So it'll predominantly be focused on where the tax rises come in on stealth taxes. And what that means is freezing thresholds, and one of them potentially might be the lifetime allowance, and freezing that for a number of years, potentially through up to 2027, 2028. We expect the majority of the freezes to come in after 2025. So this kind of gives the government a bit of leeway in terms of if the market situation improves, if kind of the economic outlook improves, then they may not carry those through after 2025, but we can certainly expect some things in relation to pension today. We can also expect today the state pension triple lock, supposedly, because a lot has been briefed to the media already, but we'll have to wait and see at 11:30, but it appears that they're going to commit to sticking with the triple lock rise in April 2023.
Okay, so a couple of things to watch out for. What happens with a triple lock and lifetime allowance sounds like one to watch. Definitely. Thanks for that, Jordan. Now, what about our own agenda? I mean, we talked a bit about the government's potential agenda. Part of our role as a voice of workplace pensions is to try and influence government's medium and long-term strategy on pensions. At our annual conference, just 3 weeks ago, we published this big policy paper. I've got the cover here, 5 steps to better pensions, time for a new consensus. And I know, Jordan, you and policy colleagues have put a lot of work into that. And it sets out ideas for setting national pension objectives and monitoring them, reforming auto-enrollment to get contributions up, state pension reform, and so on. What do you think the prospects are of us getting the government to pick those ideas up and embed them in their own strategy, or indeed getting the opposition parties who we talk to as well to pick up these ideas?
So we remain hopeful, and we would like to see change from the government on this. In terms of expectation management, I think we need to be a bit careful in terms of hoping things will come in today. We don't expect any changes in terms of automatic enrolment and in terms of some of the things that we were calling for in that report that myself and Rory helped to write, and you'll hear from Rory later on. In terms of Labour, we have a very close communication set up with the shadow pension team over there, and they have seen our proposals and they have welcomed our proposals, but going forward, whether they will choose to make any manifesto commitments on that remains to be seen.
Okay, thanks. And we've put, I see a link to the document in the chat. So if colleagues want to see PLSA's proposals, they're right there. And perhaps we'll add that to the list of things we circulate after the webinar. I suppose one last point, Jordan, we can't ignore the fact that just a few weeks ago, we had a very significant upheaval in the gilts market, a lot of challenges around liability-driven investment strategies for some pension schemes, but by no means all. Do you have any views on what that might mean for how the regulators like TPR go about their business in the future?
So we're already seeing pressure being placed on the FCA and the TPR by parliamentary committees. So the Work and Pension Select Committee has opened an inquiry into the LDI situation. We will be contributing towards that. In terms of the Lords as well, the Lords Industry Committee have also been asking questions of the FCA and the TPR on that matter. And the TPR and the FCA have both put out joint statements on that, and they've been commenting on those situations. We can expect it to come under the gaze of them a bit clearer now after what happened, considering, long story short, the kind of turmoil, somewhat maybe heavily, minorly, depending on your perspective, led to the downfall of Liz Truss's government. So yeah, we can certainly expect the regulators to take a view and a greater interest in that going forward over the coming months.
Okay, Johnny, thanks. So we'll see how that pans out. So I'm just going to remind everyone, it'd be great to get your questions in the Q&A box or your comments in the chat box, and we'll try and pick those up as we go rather than waiting to the end. So Johnny, I'm going to thank you for a moment. We'll probably be bringing you back in at some point later, but I'm going to move over to Paul Tremeling, Paul from Visa Europe. Good morning, Paul. Nice to see you. Paul, I've got a few questions about your agenda, but why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the schemes you're in charge of at Visa Europe? Give us an idea of the sort of scale of that.
Yeah, thank you, James, and yeah, good morning, everyone. So, as James already said, I'm my shorter title is a pensions manager at Visa Europe in-house. At Visa in the UK, we've got 2 trust-based schemes, and across those 2 schemes, we've got 2 defined benefit sections, closed to new entrants, still open to future accrual, and 2 DC sections. One's a non-contributory scheme, and the other one's got sort of company matching options. So that's effectively what we've got here at Visa, James.
And roughly how many members across those schemes, Paul?
About 4,000 to 5,000. 4,000 to
Okay.
5,000.
Yeah.
About half of those are current employees.
Right. So looking down the list of people who've registered for today's webinar, that puts you sort of pretty squarely sort of in the middle of that sort of group of sort of small to medium schemes. So it'd be great to hear, Paul, what are the issues that are on your personal sort of watch list for next year?
Okay. If you go to the next slide, please. We've got a number of key issues, but as you said, James, you were very keen in saying keep it short. So I'm not going to cover dashboard preparation, GMP equalization, and our actual valuation, even though that is quite important for us. So we've got sort of like, I've got 4 graphics here. I'm trying to sort of keep it a bit more interactive with the PowerPoint presentation. So the first one is we're looking to introduce a preferred IFA to our membership. I mean, historically, that we have had a lack of support at retirement. I mean, to be fair, most DB members I've spoken to, they have got an IFA in place. That's great. But we want to be a bit more helpful than simply pointing members to unbiased.co.uk or, set them up for a pension-wise appointment. Our DC member population, because our DB section has been closed, that really has grown quite quickly over the last few years. So, and arguably, they need more help because we don't have a decumulation option at retirement. So, when you're coming to retirement, there's that big potential for being scammed, with a large pot of money being transferred to someone who you may have only known for the last 3 or 4 months. So there's a big risk there. So we certainly want to try and help support our membership because there's a lot of time and effort involved to actually find an IFA. And how do you know you've actually got a good IFA? And this ties in with Visa's sort of financial well-being strategy as well, because it's not just about retirement, but we're keen to get our employees engaged with an IFA, not necessarily in the 60s, but in the 50s and the 40s, at a time where you can make changes, that hopefully will give you that better outcome at retirement. And also, we're hoping it will help with their financial education as well. So the second one issue I want to cover, it should be familiar to everyone that this is what's happened to gilt yields recently. And it shows the market volatility. And for us at Visa, because we've got leveraged LDI with our 2 DB schemes, there were some short-term collateral calls, and all of a sudden now our VEL board is actually quite interested in what's happening with the pension scheme. They would have heard elsewhere that companies have been asked by trustees, oh, we need some extra money. But fortunately, you know, the trustees have worked very quickly with their advisors. We were able to liquidate assets to actually meet those collateral calls. But it's certainly the speed at which yields moved in, certainly there was a couple of days where it moved very quickly. It does highlight the risk that I don't think our trustees really appreciated. I certainly didn't either. So the question is, you know, there's two questions. Do we want to handle this? How do we handle this moving forward? And actually, do we want to retain that sort of exposure? So that's something that the trustees are going to be working on very closely, certainly with the company, because although our assets have fallen, you know, if we weren't a small scheme, we certainly are now. We're certainly smaller in terms of assets, but our liabilities are smaller as well. And to that extent, that's actually helped us reduce that solvency sort of like buyout deficit. So that's now more manageable, and that's something that's now on the table. You know, when can we actually realistically look at buyout or buy in? So those will be conversations with the trustees and the company, because needless to say, the company will be interested from the point of view of how much money will go into the pension scheme, but also, you know, what would be the potential impact on the corporate accounts. The third thing I just wanted to cover was something we've been thinking about recently, and that's lifestyle strategy. So a bit of background, at Visa, we've actually got three lifestyle options. One is aimed at members who are looking to take their pension pot at retirement as cash. So typically then that glide path then, as you get closer to retirement, will be, you know, pretty much 100% in cash. So to the extent that gilt yields have gone up, stock markets have fallen, they've been fairly immune to those changes. The second option or lifestyle option we provide are for aimed at members who want to convert their funds into an annuity. So typically then, as you get closer to retirement, there's a gradual move then into gilts and bonds. Now, to the extent then that those values, the value of their pension fund will have fallen, annuity prices have become more attractive. So on average, perhaps, you know, members have not been that worse off. Which leads us to our third option. This is the one that's shown in the chart. This is what we call our sort of like our options open lifestyle for those who aren't really sure where they want to go. And if you look at this, the dark blue there sort of like highlights the sort of like the exposure to stocks and shares. So you can see that as we get closer to retirement, we're de-risking and moving into the bonds and gilts. But if we take a step back and take a more holistic view, we can see that, or we can think, well, actually, if you get come into retirement, that pot of money may actually be invested for another 10 or 15 or even 20 years. So you certainly think, actually, in the longer term, do I really want to be in bonds and gilts that early on? So that'll be something we'll certainly be sitting down and discussing with our advisors next year. And the fourth one here is it sort of like relates to one of the most sort of common type of questions I'm asked when I give the in-house presentations to our employees about pension is, am I saving enough and how much do I need to retire? So what this tells me about someone who asked me that is they probably haven't got a target in mind. And when I say target, I'm referring to like a retirement date or a level of income. So for me, that's a good excuse then to introduce them to the retirement living standards, which I know is very well supported by the PLSA. And if we think about what we actually provide about for annual benefit statements, there's only one projection in there to a single retirement age based on the current contribution rate that member's actually paying. So wouldn't it be helpful if we can actually show what the outcome would be if we varied the age at which you retired and we varied those contribution rates? Now, what that could result in then is a very large table with lots and lots of numbers. Now, I'm not looking to do that. If we do that, we're going to not get people engaged. It's not going to help them get them educated about their pension. So what I've done internally at Visa is I've developed this tool that produces what I call like a retirement heat map. So behind these colors and behind those numbers, those percentages, we've actually worked out what that fund would actually equivalently provide you as an income and compare it to the target income. So I think it's a lot more engaging. It's a lot easier for a member or an employee to look at that and get a good feel of, because we're using the common sort of like code of green is good and red is bad. You know, so if you look at your, you know, your desired retirement age and your income as well, and it's red, you can sort of see at what age or what contribution rates would I need to put in to actually get it to a green status. So it's again, it's not advice, and I make it very, very clear that this is just an illustrative purposes. So if you do want to get that advice, obviously refer to an IFA. So I think that was all I was going to say there about those our 4 key issues there, James. So I wasn't sure if you had any questions.
I do, Paul, and thank you very much for that. But first, let's see, we've got John Pengelly, I think, that's come in the Q&A box with a question, which I'm just calling up now. And you may not feel able to answer this, I don't know, but
Okay.
if I can go, John's asking, which IFA firms are you considering in your search for an IFA? And if you can't answer that, then maybe you could tell us sort of what are the criteria you're using in your sort of selection search.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't gone through this process before, so we're taking advice from a well-known consultancy. You know, other consultancies are available, and they've given us a short list, and certainly I've been to various conferences, etc., and there was a couple of other IFAs I felt I wanted included in that short list, and so we've actually reached out to 9, and in terms of who or what does an IFA need to bring to the table to get included in that shortlist? We've got 2 or 3 very few things. One's value for money. You know, I've been shocked at some of the fees that have been quoted from other IFAs when they're sort of giving advice, particularly to DB members, for transfer values. So we certainly want to have something that's very effective and something that won't put employees off. The last thing you want to do is put in an IFA and everyone just says, I'm not going to use that IFA, it's too expensive. So that's certainly one thing. Impartial advice. You know, they want to, you know, we don't want IFAs who've got a hidden agenda. And I don't want to be seen here to be doing IFAs down, but you know, this is just feedback I've received from members. But the most important thing is whole of market. Okay, I am aware of IFAs where they can give you that impartial advice, but they'll only have a short, small range of products that they're tied to. So we're very, very clear here, and we've been working with our advisor on this, and so we want whole of market IFAs.
Okay, that's really helpful, Paul. Thanks very much. And just you mentioned the retirement living standards as well. Just sort of give us a little bit of a plug. You're absolutely right. That's a key tool that the PLSA has developed for people like yourself, trustees as well, to use to give members a sense of what kind of income they'll need in retirement to fund the lifestyle they want. We've had a lot of interest in that. A lot of schemes are now using it on their websites, in their newsletters, whatever they send to members. So we'll add that to the link to the website for the retirement living standards, to the material we circulate after this, because I know a lot of schemes are finding it very useful. But Paul, I'm going to thank you for now. Okay. That's great. I'm going to bring in my colleague Karen Hurst. Karen's our DB expert. Karen, you're going to run us through what you think of the top issues on the DB agenda for next year, I think. Over to you.
Yes, indeed. What an introduction. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, yeah, so some of what's the phrase? Some of the political upheaval that Jordi referred to at the beginning there, I think it's fair to say it's certainly, it's pushed a lot of things back. There was a few things on our list from last year that got pushed into this year. And we're drawing up our list as we speak for next year, and they're still on there. So that's clearly been less than ideal in terms of understanding some of, you know, what's coming at our members in the coming years. But I'm going to start with the DB funding code, which is the top thing on our list in the DB team. So to cast our minds back, the Pension Schemes Act 2021, it set out a new requirement that DB schemes to determine a funding strategy for ensuring that benefits can be paid over the long term. So that's already in legislation. What does that look like? Well, there's a few things that need to happen before we really understand that. One of those things has somewhat already happened, so we were waiting on the DWP to consult on regulations. Again, that was something we waited a while for. We finally seen that consultation in the summer. It closed maybe just a month ago. in many ways it was a sort of frustrating as we didn't know, we didn't see the whole picture, I think it's fair to say. So we're waiting as well on TPR sort of setting out what their expectations are. So in a way, and this was something a lot of people raised, we were sort of being asked to comment on something, we could only see half the picture, and that was less than ideal. The half that we could see, there was certainly a lot of concern around some of the expectations. So you might have heard this phrase, low dependency funding basis, which was, so basically all schemes are expected to get to that state of when they're at a point of significant maturity. That seemed to us to be sort of shoehorning everyone into, you know, quite a narrow investment strategy that we were concerned about. We know open schemes have had a lot of concerns about what it would mean for them. There's a lot in there. I think it's fair to say needs a lot of consideration. In terms of what happens next, so the DWP are obviously considering the responses to that consultation. We understand it's still their intention that they want to any new system to come into force from next September, which is obviously quite a tight time frame that they've given themselves. So we need to understand what the regulations will look like, and also what the TPR guidance will be. So we've heard discussion of new systems. You know, you might have heard the phrases fast track and bespoke. So the sort of thinking is, if some schemes meet the criteria for fast track, they'll get less scrutiny. We don't know what their kind of thinking is on that yet. We're waiting to see what that will look like in the guidance. So what to, in theory, there's a lot still to happen before next September. Obviously, we're keeping our eye on that, and we'll continue to you know, to keep everyone informed and to give everyone an opportunity to comment on it, because there's a lot of consulting still to happen there. The second thing on my list is the single code. So that's not just DB, that's DC as well. So there was quite a major consultation on this. This is TPR's plans to bring together all their existing codes into one consolidated code. On paper, it shouldn't introduce new rules. It's not a new, there's no new regulations associated with it, but nevertheless, it's fair to say that when they consulted on this, it was early 2021, there was quite a lot in there that was sort of going a lot further than current expectations, and there were some areas of concern, particularly I think it's fair to say if you're an LGPS member. So at the moment, we still don't know the outcome, and I was refreshing my memory of this morning, and when they consulted on it, they said they expected it to come into force in the summer of 2022. That's been and gone. The last I heard, we were expecting the new code to be laid in Parliament in January with a view to it coming in March. So we'll obviously keep our eye on that. Just to draw your attention, there's a really good made simple guide we've already produced on one of the elements, one of the new elements, which is the own risk assessment, which we suspect to be quite a lot of work for you know, for anyone not doing that already. So that's something to keep your eye out for probably in the early part of next year. The next thing on my list is climate reporting. So if you've got over 100 members, I suspect this is already on your radar in some way. I'm assuming that those on the call today are not reporting according to mandatory TCFD requirements. So at the moment, only schemes over $1 billion assets under management are required to do so. The situation, if you're under that, is the last the government said on this is that they'll take stock in 2023 as to how they would extend it to those smaller schemes, with a view to consulting more widely in 2024. So you shouldn't expect new requirements with regard to TCFD to come in next year, albeit I think it's fair to say that next year will be the beginning of the discussion on what that looks like. There's some chat, I mean the PLSA will certainly be consulting our members on this to better understand what's sort of feasible, but I think there's certainly some feeling amongst many that the current requirements as they apply to larger schemes may be a bit challenging for smaller schemes. You know, we may want to press for something that's a wee bit more principles based. To sort of look at the sort of wider ESG agenda that sort of going beyond just climate and TCFD, there's obviously a lot happening, as there always is in this area. So the DWP published some new stewardship guidance this year already, which you may want to look at if you've not already. There's a new task force happening, looking at how we can better define the S in ESG, which is has long been a challenge, I think it's fair to say. There's also an FCA group that's put together to look at vote reporting, which is something that we're members of both those, and we'll obviously continue to sort of engage with that as best we can. Just to say, I think you mentioned, James, we've got one LGPS member on today. The situation is a bit different. If you're an LGPS member, there's a consultation open at the moment, so for the next week, on how to introduce TCFD there. That would apply to all TCFD sections or administering authorities. So there's no 1 billion kind of threshold there. So that's something to be aware of. They're expecting that will come in next year, with the first reports due in 2024. And the final thing I just wanted to flag is, I mean, we don't know much about this, but if you were at our ESG conference back in March, you might have heard the Secretary of State announce that 2023 will be the year of the trustee. She said that it was to recognise some of the excellent work trustees are already doing, and to look at a range of support and opportunities, as she recognised that we're asking a lot of trustees at this point. Again, don't really know what this will look like. I think it's probably dependent on what the new minister wants to do, and whether or not it's something she's sort of keen to embrace. We heard some chat that it may involve a consultation on the role of trustees, but we don't really know what that will look like. But again, that's something we'll be keeping our eye on for next year.
Thanks, Karen. Well, as you say, but there is a lot for trustees and scheme managers to keep their eyes on there. Thanks for running. So some big ticket items you mentioned there: DB funding code, the new single code of practice from the regulator, all the stuff around climate, and this mysterious year for trustee as well. Just going back to the single code, though, I mean, I know obviously you said that affects that covers DB and DC, so it's highly relevant to everyone on this call. You're expecting it to come in March, I think you said. So where can our members go to get some more information about that? Because it seems like it's coming up on the rails sort of quite quickly.
Yeah, I just say, I mean, the March thing, not confirmed. That's our understanding, yeah, based on what we call it, some of our off the record discussion, shall we say. But yeah, the latest, I think it's been delayed just because, as Jordy says, 3 ministers in as many months. So the latest we heard was that they were progress has been made. You know, it seemed to be at the point, nearing the point at which they can confirm what the final code will look like. There is one element to it. If you're a master trust, they haven't consulted on the one module relating to master trusts. So it's unclear. We have raised it, but it's unclear how it will apply to master trusts when it come in. But nevertheless, the last we heard was they were hoping to weigh the new code in January, with March as a kind of provisional date. Obviously, when I imagine we'll be doing, sort of stuff to publicise it, we'll do what we can to kind of ensure those events for members, and any sort of guidance that we feel we can add to it. We have published a Made Simple guide on this already, relating to the own risk assessment element. That was a new element in it. The guidance, the draft single code says that they expected that to be I think it's called a substantial process. So that's something that's not really set out at the moment. So we tried to get ahead, and we've already published the Made Simple guide on that, and we'll be continued to sort of do what we can to raise awareness of these things for members here.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, and I know the Made Simple guides are always very popular with members. When I go and talk to members about our services, it's one of the things they always single out as something they really value. So let's add that to the list of stuff we're going to circulate after this call. Thanks very much, Karen. That's great for now. I'm going to turn quickly over to Rory Grant, another of our excellent colleagues. Rory looks after a whole array of DC issues mostly. So Rory, you're going to give your overview. What's on the DC agenda people need to be watching out for, please?
Thanks, James. And yes, plenty to look out for, I think, and probably similar to what Karen said. I think the kind of turbulence and everything going on in Westminster over the last couple of months has meant that a number of initiatives have probably been pushed back. So probably quite a few of the priority areas and policy areas that we are focused on this year as priorities that will continue to sort of have that status next year, and will continue to be areas that schemes will need to sort of maintain an interest in. It would be, well, probably remiss of me not to begin with our strategic priority this year, which has been pensions adequacy. And you, James, you and Geordie both mentioned sort of all the work. It's been really all hands on deck this year to publish the report that we published at our conference last month, 5 Steps to Better Pensions. So I'll mention that briefly. I mean, really to summarise our findings by kind of any measure of adequacy, be that the Pensions Commission target replacement rates or our own retirement living standards, few people are really on track probably for the retirement that they'd hoped for. It improves slightly when you factor in the state pension. Most are on track to meet the minimum level of the RLS. But I think only a quarter of households are on track to meet the moderate level. So as part of our project, we carried out extensive modelling to assess the benefits of a whole sort of package of reforms, which include removing the lower earnings limit for auto enrolment, and also reducing the qualifying age for auto enrolment down to 18, as well as some reforms to the state pension. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the results of that kind of package altogether do show significantly better outcomes, with a 25% improvement in retirement income for median earners. So as a result, we've kind of made 5 key recommendations, but we're acutely aware, obviously during a cost of living crisis, it's a pretty fine line to be trodden when it comes to encouraging people to put more into a pension when so many people need much of that money kind of in the immediate term. So what we're doing is consulting from now until March on these measures, to gather input on what kind of people more broadly think would not just be effective in terms of improving pension outcomes, but also possible, frankly. So just briefly, those recommendations. The first is, I think you mentioned earlier, to set a clear kind of adequate, affordable and fair objective for UK pensions and have some sort of monitoring against that. We also think there needs to be some more reform of the state pension to improve the benefits that affords people. Again, as I mentioned, reform of automatic enrolment to extend the coverage and level of it, and gradually get contributions up. And then there are kind of additional policy interventions for groups of society that are sort of under-pensioned, we call it. So less well provisioned currently. So they include women, gig economy workers, the self-employed, and other groups too. And the final one is in sort of enhancements to voluntary saving. So what I would just say is, as I say, we're consulting between now and March. So please do, if you've got kind of particular views on adequacy, areas of our recommendations that you agree with or disagree with, please do get involved as we look to take that forward. So we want to hear from anyone and everyone really on that. The second topic I'll mention is probably one, I imagine it's one that's on the agenda of everyone on the call, and that's pension dashboards. They continue to be a priority for us. And I think I hope that the prominence of progress made on this initiative will increase next year as the staging timeline begins for schemes to connect to dashboards. But there's been quite a lot of activity from government regulators and the dashboards program itself in the last few weeks. So I'll give you a quick rundown of where we are. So currently legislation is, and this is the legislation to compel schemes and providers to provide data to dashboards and return relevant information in response to find requests. So that legislation is currently going through Parliament. So that should, in the coming weeks, that should come to pass. And FCA land is actually one step ahead. So final rules are now in place for FCA regulated pension providers who now need to connect to dashboards by August next year. There's also been work from the dashboards program on its dashboard standards, and this really is the framework that data providers and dashboard providers have to work within when it comes to the data, the reporting, connection rules, and also all the technical elements of the project. And there'll be further specifically on the design standards, there'll be further work and consultation over the winter, and that's to sort of establish what users of dashboards will see, so the front end, and to set standards for that. Probably our biggest focus for dashboards over the next few months and over the winter will be on the dashboards availability point, which is the point at which dashboards go live essentially. And we're going to be working with government to establish four categories of criteria that we really sort of think need to be met and tested comprehensively ahead of that point. and they cover coverage of dashboards, effective operations, security, and user experience. So just briefly back to everyone on the call and what smaller schemes, I guess, need to be thinking about and expecting in terms of dashboards. Well, most of you, I imagine, will be having to connect to dashboards over the next couple of years, but I'm guessing most, I think you said it's mainly schemes on the call with 16,000 members and below, James.
That's right. Yeah.
So most of you probably won't be connecting until 2024 at least, given it's the largest schemes in Master Trust next year. So hopefully that'll afford some opportunity to learn from the experiences of those larger schemes, what went well, what was difficult, and to have a sort of slightly easier process for those connecting thereafter. But generally, yeah, we'd say keep an eye on that, and also engage as soon as you can with your administrators and integrated service providers if you're using them, to kind of get that implementation plan for connection in place as soon as you can, and just to be prepared. I'm probably starting to run out of time, so I'll just briefly cover decumulation next. And this is an area that we've worked a lot on this year with DWP. In essence, I guess in auto-enrollment, we've got the basis, and yes, contributions, etc., need to increase and coverage needs to increase, but we've got the basis for a solution for accumulation in pensions. But we've got this sort of impending tidal wave of future DC retirees who are going to have pots of money, but without really much idea of how best to make that pot of money sustain their retirement, a retirement that could last over 30 years, and with needs changing over 30 years. There's currently little support on offer for that sort of mass market where financial advice maybe isn't an option. So we did some anecdotal research with our membership earlier this year, and that showed a real kind of increase from the part of Master Trust and providers mainly for creating kind of in-scheme hybrid solutions with a kind of mix of drawdown, perhaps for the earlier part of retirement, and annuities for later on in retirement, with a kind of integrated guidance process. But that really it's generally at the moment, it seems to be fairly limited to those largest schemes. So for quite a lot of savers in the own trust sector, there's we think still some work to be done in terms of getting more support to retirees. So we've worked closely with DWP this year. They ran a call for evidence in the summer, where we kind of made the case for our guided retirement income choices framework, which would essentially require schemes to put in place more guidance, more support, and that kind of path of least resistance into some sort of range of products or hybrid product that might suit them. But in terms of and obviously there were a lot of smaller and own trust schemes on the call. Again, I'd be really interested to hear, sort of maybe offline, or if you get in touch, about your thoughts on what guidance, what solutions, what in scheme or potentially signposting elsewhere, what you're considering for your members at retirement. I know it's a sort of hot topic, and a lot of schemes are talking about it. I know at our annual conference there were a lot of sessions on this topic. So, but hearing from schemes like yourselves would be really interesting. So we do hear a lot from the master trusts and the big providers, but less so from the likes of yourselves.
Thanks, Roy. That's great. Really great summary there. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to invite all our speakers to come back in, because I've got one last question but I didn't warn you about, I'm afraid. I'm going to put you all a little bit on the spot and ask each of you each run through several issues that you think need to be on the agenda for smaller schemes for next year. For each of you, what's the top one? And what would you pick out as the key issue to watch out for? And I'm going to go to Paul first. What can you answer that, Paul, in a couple of sentences? I
can answer it in 3 initials: IFA.
Right. Okay. So that's what you're doing in your scheme, and similar lines. Yeah,
I'm very passionate about engaging and educating our employees and getting them the best possible outcome. And I think getting an IFA on board is the right way forward.
And thanks, Paul. And Geordie, your thoughts?
I would say, I would say pension dashboards. I think dashboards has potential to completely revolutionise how people engage with their pensions.
Karen?
If I was a trustee, I think I'd be most concerned about the DB funding code.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll keep a close eye on that. Rory?
So I think probably top of the agenda is the kind of overall for a lot of DC trustees will be the overall burden of disclosures and reporting. And one topic I didn't get to in when I was speaking was value for money. Yeah. But that has the potential to bring in a whole load more kind of additional disclosures, metrics that need to be reported against and value assessments made. So the kind of how that interacts with existing requirements such as the chair's statement and all the rest of it. I mean, and if and when the single code comes in too, that'll provide another kind of dimension to that. So I think that kind of overall burden is probably the biggest thing.
Okay. Well, look, that's a great summary. We've whistled through a huge amount of content there. It shows how much is on the agenda for next year. So thank you all. So thanks, Paul. Particularly, it's always great to have our members involved in these webinars, but great also to have my colleagues Karen, Geordie and Rory involved too. So thanks all. Thanks to everyone who's dialed in and contributed. If you've got thoughts and comments, as Rory was saying, do ping them to us. You can send them to me or straight to anyone on this call. We'll circulate the slides and the recording and a couple of other follow-up items that I mentioned. And thanks again and enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye, everyone.